All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to this lunch and learn put on by the Ames Home Builders Association, sponsored by the Ames Economic Alliance, Ames Regional Economic Alliance. Sorry, I'm still getting used to the name here. My name is Dylan Klein. I work for the Alliance and also am the current president of the Ames Home Builders Association board. So I'd like to just thank the Alliance for sponsoring an event like this. Economic development traditionally has focused on smokestacks, but it's become more important for economic developers to focus on rooftops to support those smokestacks as we're looking to develop places for employees to live and affordable places for employees to live. So really thought it was important for this initiative with the Ames Home Builders Association and this lunch and learn on the Workforce Housing Tax Credit Workshop for the Alliance to support this effort. So before we get started here, we've got a few guests that are joining us. We've got Kelly Beekman, Planning and Housing Director of the City of Ames, Corey Goodnow, Director of Finance, Cindy Im she's the Economic Development Director of Hamilton County, Tyler Frederickson is the President of the Story City, and McKinley, Director of the Story City Greater Chamber Connection, and Kara Warney, who is the Chief Development Officer of ISS and for Iowa State Senate. So thank you for all of our guests joining us, and then for all of our members as well. So on to our speaker. So I'm pleased to introduce Nick Sorensen with the Iowa Economic Development Authority. Nick is the Tax Credit Program Manager for Iowa Economic Development Authority, and in his role he oversees the workforce housing, which we're here to talk about, and state historic tax credit programs, which have currently 200 open applications, which guy. So thank you for that. Nick has experience in his previous life with being a building official, zoning official, and code enforcement, so he knows his way around housing. And Nick is currently a member of the Iowa Rural Development Council and is a certified historic real estate development professional, finance professional through the National Development Council. So Nick, thank you for being here.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, so basically what I oversee are tax credits, and not everybody knows what a tax credit is. If you apply for it, it's not a grant. It's not money coming to you. It's to give you tax relief, right? So the Workforce Housing Tax Credit Program, and Dylan, you know, you hit the nail on the head. We chase smokestacks, right? Well, in chasing them, that business is going to say, what's your housing availability? Because I need employees. If you don't have housing availability for their jobs that they have, they're going to move on to the next town. And that's why we have this Workforce Housing Tax Credit Incentive Program, is to try, we understand expenses are getting more and more every single year. This is to bring those expenses down to get it in that affordability range. So with that, oh, okay. Not a problem. Well, and this one's just kind of basic overview. Workforce Housing Tax Credit, the applications open in January and they close in June. Why do we have them open that long? Well, it's to allow you to plan, right? That might abbreviate a little bit. It's awarded every fiscal year. So just bear in mind, your award, if you get it, is in August, and do not start in construction until you get a signed contract. Is it ideal that you start construction in August? Absolutely not, and I apologize for that. The key thing I want you to remember is, yes, I was a building official, but I was a building official that found my way to a yes, not a no. If there was a problem, we found our way to a yes, and that's the same way I operate this program. We're not going to start at a no, we're going to be at a yes. Okay, so Workforce Housing Tax Credit it's a 10% or 20% tax credit on the first $150,000 of eligible expenses, okay? $150,000, 10 or 20%. Well, who gets 10, who gets 20? There we go. Large communities get 10%. And if you are a community that falls into these counties, see how Story's in there? You get the 10%. If you're in Hamilton County, if you're in Boone County, you get the 20%. All right. Now with that, there's also your small community definition. So any community not in those 80 or in those 11 most populated counties, or if you have a population of 25,000 or less based on 2020 census data, and you have a population growth of 30% or less from 2010 to 2020. What all that means here is for Story County specific, because the surrounding counties here get the 20%. Cambridge, Collins, Colo, Gilbert, Kelly, Maxwell, McCallsburg, Roland, Slater, and Zering. They all qualify for the 20% tax credit. Sorry, Story City, you don't. So let's talk a little bit about eligible sites. All. I'll just put it that way. Essentially all, right? Greenfield, brownfield, upper story units. We want housing however it's going to fit your community, right? And you're the ones that know your community best. Let us know. But I really stress, don't forget on those upper story units in your downtowns. Yes, I used to be a part of the Downtown Resource Center, but those are what help those downtown buildings cash flow. It allows the lease rate for that commercial space to be just a little bit less because you're getting rent from up above. Repair or rehab. So if you decided, city possibly, that you had a whole bunch of dilapidated houses that you have acquired and you wanted to work with a developer to get that into their hands for rehab, that's fantastic. Infill, you have a whole bunch of lots that you need to get rid of and you want to put a project together, get those lots to a developer and we'll work with them.
Can you go back?
Yeah. Yeah, so Greenfield is just going to be untouched ground, right? You haven't been there yet. Brownfield or Grayfield, essentially you have site utilities to it, and there might be something there that is a contaminant, underground tanks from a gas station. It could have been a former dry cleaner that's preventing development, right? A site where there's been manufacturing, there's substantial amounts of oil saturation that has finally passed clearance through the federal government, sites like that. So minimum units for eligibility. 4 single-family units in your large communities, 2 if it's a small community. Or you can do 1 multifamily building as long as there's at least 3 units. The way we define single-family is nobody lives above, nobody lives below, and you don't use the same entrance. Townhomes, those are single family. You have a firewall separation there, right? You can do 2 upper story units in your larger communities. So this is all based off of how do we keep them in that affordable range, that workforce, that missing middle. We put a price cap on what you can spend in qualified expenses on those units. So for a single family unit, you cannot have qualifying expenses over $305,000. We'll get into qualified expenses here in a little bit. For a multi-family unit, it's $230,000. Economies of scale, right? It gets less the more you build. So the cost directly related to is kind of what we refer to it as, but here's what's included in that cap. Site prep, surveying, construction materials, labor, architectural, and engineering services. So anything outside of that does not fall into that. Your land acquisition, your construction loan interest, those things, here's everything that is not included in that cap. Appliances, building inspection fees, developer fees, that's all excluded from that. So that 305 or that 230 may seem difficult until you take into consideration what all has to be included in it. Yeah. Very good question. Anything within the parcel. Anything in the right of way, That is not included in that cost cap. So, like I said, it's a 10 or a 20% on the first 150. So if you think about it from a development point of view, how do you maximize this tax credit? Well, you try to hit that 150 or a little bit above. Now, what I don't want to see is sacrificing quality just to try and maximize the tax credit, right? But you want to stay under that 305 or that 230 and above 150 to be able to maximize the tax credit. Because if at the end of this project, and we do the math and we find out you were able to do it for 120 a unit, then it's your 10 or 20% is based off of that 120,000. One other thing I forgot to mention, you get sales tax on your construction materials too. You don't get 7%, you get 6% because of the local option sales tax. But you get 6% back on your construction materials. So as contractors, the thing to keep in mind here is keeping those receipts, making sure we're keeping our expenses separate. So this is just kind of a layout of the way it might look numbers-wise. So if you have a total project cost of 3.5 for 24 units, so what we would do is we would take that 3.5 divided by the 24, and you're at 145,833 per unit. So then I multiply that by 10, so we're 14,833 in tax credit per unit, and you had 24 units. It works out to a 339,999 tax credit award. If you had $1 million of that 3.5 was construction materials, you get an additional $60,000 back to you as well. So a total award on that, $409,999 for a $3.5 million project. That's a pretty good percentage of it. In a small community, you just take essentially and you multiply it by your 0.2. Okay, so 6 million, 30 units. Well, that's 20,000 per unit. And you're sitting there above the 150 per unit. So 150 at 20%, 30,000 times 30, and then get your sales tax at 120. You're eligible for 1,020,000, but we have a cap on awards. You only get up to $1 million per project. So what all is required? Local match is a requirement. And by local match, that means city involvement. And that's 1,000 per unit. The city must participate 1,000 per unit. How they choose to participate, we'll work with them on it. Whether it's if your building permit fees are $500, okay. If you're waiving those, that counts to it. If your water sewer taps are another fee, we'll take that into consideration as well. Honestly, the easiest one is just tax abatement. That's the one we see the most, and that's one that almost every community already has on the books. So a copy of that provided to us, or a letter from a city official saying that yes, by right, they get this. But we also need a resolution of support to the workforce housing program to your project. Cities will take a blanket resolution and say, we are in support of workforce housing tax credit projects throughout our community. No, we want to know that you and the city and the developers are talking, that they are aware of one another, that they know the project that you're applying, and that they back that. And that's a convenient way to build into that resolution, and we are supporting this with our tax abatement or whatever that they're going to use. This is just an example of the resolution that we use. So ineligible projects, 100-year floodplain, unless you have what's called a LOMAR, letter of map revision from FEMA. We don't want to be building in floodplains. Any projects that are receiving low-income housing tax credits. They each have their own purpose and they need to be kept separate. We do not want to see Airbnbs or short-term leases. That's not what this is about. This is about getting people living and staying in your community. Or a project that's in use and you're just looking to spruce it up. Nope. You're a property owner. Take care of your property. So the application itself, right? The entity applying for the award. So a lot of times the developer is going to create an individual LLC for this build, and that makes sense, right? Keep your costs separate. But that is created under a parent company. We need to know the parent company information as well. So the project information that we ask for is basically your site, the project itself, the unit types, your financing, which kind of alludes to your project readiness, and the impact. The impact, as you can see, is 16 points. We want to know what this is going to do for your community. And then your financing sources and the budget. So I touched on it, your applicant, your legal entity applying for the award. We need to know the signers. So a lot of times what happens is we don't get the correct information. We get to project close and you get your tax certificate and you're calling me because you can't redeem it. Well, it's because you are not the authorized signer by Iowa Department of Revenue. Now you're stuck with Iowa Department of Revenue and good luck. No apologies if anybody ever worked for them. They're a state agency. I shouldn't talk about them because they are our friends. But good luck, right? They're busy. It's better to take care of it with me before we even get to that point. And that should be who's signing your contract, and that's who's going to sign your tax credits at the end. If that ever changes, you just tell me in the process and we can get that updated. Developer contact information. It's important we have an up-to-date email address and phone number, just in case we need to get a hold of you, something happened, and you can get a hold of me. All of these are housed in iowagrants.gov. Anybody familiar with iowagrants.gov? Yeah, it's terrible. It's not fun. But it's the system we have to work with, therefore that's where everything's housed in there. And you can email me direct, but you can also email me through this system as well, and then it's documented. I don't mind phone calls, right? But if you have a series of questions, I want an email so that there is something for you to reference back to. Because I want you to be able to say, but Nick, you said this. I've got the email. And you're like, you know what? You're right. You're right. It's just accountability for everybody involved. Parent company, and then we ask for consultants. So Ames Economic Alliance, they're the ones that they're a grant writer for you. We call this a grant. It's a tax credit. But if they're the ones writing it for you, we want their information as well. So project site. I put this on here because project name, in Iowa Grants, you can give your project any name you want. Please be brief because I have to type these frequently. You know, they get really long, you know, Marion 24 multiplex on Greenfield and Brownfield supported by, no, just be brief. Project address, that's important as well because we want to know if we have previously given you a workforce housing tax credit on this project and you're coming back for more. Because if you're coming back for more, it means you're not taking care of your property. City, state, county, zip code required. Site selection, so there's financial and development factors. Financial, it's going to be because this community offered this, or because of the job growth. I know they have a vacancy rate of this, or it can be the land price. The ease to infrastructure, water, sewer is already there. Sidewalk, we have a bike trail right in the backyard, you know, things like that. And that alludes into appeal for prospective residents, right? Bike trail. I've got a dog park over here. The pool's right here. If you're proposing to build in the back 40, right, completely disconnected from the rest of the community and the connectivity to all the resources that community has to provide, how's that appealing to that future resident, right? That's difficult, tough sell. You get 2 points for adaptive reuse because it's great. We want to build new, absolutely, but let's not forget about our assets that we have sitting here that have not been tapped into. So the reuse or the adaptive reuse, as everybody's going remote, we're noticing a lot more office space popping up available. And those do kind of make sense to turn into residential units. Just depends on the building. Historic, you get 2 points. Now, just because you think it's historic doesn't make it historic, right? Building needs to be possibly eligible for historic tax credits. And your best way of finding that out is contacting the State Historic Preservation Office and getting it documented from them that yes, you are eligible to apply for state historic tax credits. And it's defined in 404A of the State of Iowa Code. So infill, you get an additional 2 points. And if you're tallying up the points here, you're going to discover you can't get a perfect score. You can't get the max points because an old historic building is not an infill site, right? The workforce housing tax credit, for lack of a better term, is like the easiest housing program we have, and there's intentionality behind that because we want you to use it. What's that do? It makes it competitive. But we hit all housing as much as we can. Rehabilitation of existing residential building, you get 2 points on that. Your description of the project, it's going to be brief, but this is what we use in press releases. This is what I take to Director Durham to explain what this project is and also what I've seen in your application. This is also what Governor Reynolds is going to see, right? So being concise, but really explaining the project itself. Your project design, right? If you have building plans, right? Your site plan, but not only that, site elevations. If we can see what the end product is going to be, that helps us a lot in scoring because at the end of the day, we want to be able to come to your project and say we're proud of this, right? And with that, you also want to tell us in this application what's important to your residents in your community. What's important, we'll just say in Gilbert, isn't necessarily what is important in Slater, right? So explain why this project and how it fits in what's important with those residents. Developer experience. Years of experience and number of projects constructed, that's up to 3 points. So if you're a new developer, you might get 1 or 2, but if you've been doing this for a long time, you could get 2 or 3. If you have previous workforce housing tax credit experience, you're probably going to get the 3 as long as the project went well. The experience narrative is 3 points as well. Past 5 years and your capacity. Where are you at? Do you have 25 projects open that you're trying to get wrapped up, but you're looking to take on another one? Well, maybe apply next year when you get some of those wrapped up. No. So unit information. What we want to know is essentially square footages, number of bed and bath. We also are asking for your lease rate or your sales price, because far too often we are seeing the price cap that we have of 305. If you include all those other things, 350 would be reasonable sale price. We're starting to see 450 and 500. That's not workforce. That's custom build. There's a market for that. They don't need to apply for this program. Project building type. So single family, townhome, duplex, that's 2 points. That's where our focus is, trying to get people living in your community. And if you notice, occupancy type gets an additional 2 points as well. We're really driving people to invest into the community to stay there. I will be perfectly honest, half of these last round were multifamily. It's pretty much split, right? Because the risk for single family is a lot higher than it is for multifamily. So financing and readiness to proceed, proper zoning, and that can just be from a city official, whether it's the mayor, if you have a zoning official saying this is zone R3 or whatever it might be, that it's appropriate for multifamily or RS10 for single family, whatever it might be, just that the zoning letter supports the project that's there. We don't want to see the same zoning letter for different projects, right? That blanket statement, that blanket resolution, we need to make sure these are informed. You get 1 point if you upload architectural drawings. Is this on the back of a bar napkin? No. If you actually have floor plans, if you actually have square footages, that really helps us out to establish at the end of the project, this is what it's going to be. And then anything else you can think of readiness to proceed, right? You own the property, the utilities are there, you have lined up all your subs and they are ready to break ground come August, whatever it might be. Those things help us out a lot. And then financial need. So we'll get into it a little bit later, but essentially a perfect budget submitted on one of these applications is you only show me you have enough funding for this project completely without the workforce housing tax credit and your sales tax reimbursement. Because what that does is it shows you need the workforce housing tax credit for this project to happen, and you have a gap without it. So you have 100% financing if we're a partner with you, right? We'll get into that a little bit more. So your project financing, I mentioned showing the gap. Your letters from your bank, right, for your loan, we understand you're probably not going to get a loan if you're trying to show me a gap, right? The bank's going to say, how do we write this up? A letter from the bank that shows rate, term, and amount, and it can be subject to appropriate appraisals. It can be subject to many different things, but as long as we know that you have talked to your bank and you have things in order so that when we sign on the contract, that you can just go to the bank and say, I have the contract, give me the loan. Now you can move forward. A letter from the bank saying, yes, we support the project does not work. Rate, amount, term. With that, your equity, right? You should have some equity in it. Any bank's going to say, well, okay, we'll give you 80%, but you got to come up with the 20%. Showing us a bank statement that you have that has the 20% in the bank statement is not sufficient. And the reason it's not sufficient is, let's just say it's $20,000 that you need to have your 20%. How do we know that's not encumbered, right? You don't have debt that's against that. Having a third party certify your equity. That can be a CPA if you want to spend the money on it, or it can simply just be the bank. I had a project for historic, not that I just scored, that I won't say who, but they said, yes, they have 200 million in the bank and 109 million unencumbered. Okay, well, we can move forward with that project. It was just that simple. But your scoring is based off of secured financing. So you'll see 5% non-workforce funding secured. So take your total project cost, not the qualifying expenses, but your total project cost, subtract out what you qualify for in workforce and sales tax refund, and then have the supporting documentation for the rest. Usually the buffer is the equity. That's the number that you can kind of work with a little bit. This is just kind of it's hard for you all to see, and this is available online as well from our website. But it just gives an example of a letter that we have approved. Project impact. So we get into that 16 points. So economic and community impact, business expansion, or business location. right? New jobs being created or new jobs that are not being created because you don't have the housing. That's what we're looking for there. The impact on the community, we'll just say Slater hasn't had a multifamily unit built in the community since 1988. We have no comparables because of that. So when we apply for a loan, we get hit with economic obsolescence, and this fills that gap that the bank says. And what this will do is it'll give us a comparable for our next project and our next project and our next project. Market needs important. So there's three ways essentially that you can do this. You can do a third party housing needs assessment, or you can have a county community housing assessment study that a lot of communities have and it gets put on a shelf. Or you can do your own as a developer. On the application itself, we have an Excel spreadsheet that essentially asks all the information that you need to make an informed decision on if you want to do this project or not. But there needs to be intentionality out of it. If you are researching single family home rentals and you are proposing single family home sales, it's not comparable, right? Be intentional about what you're researching on it. Letters of support, you get 1 point on that. Do not include city or county, right? Because anybody can get one from the city or county. We want to know that you have reached out to what's really good, a major employer that needs the housing. That's perfect. Underserved cities. So if you have not had a workforce housing tax credit award in the last 3 years, you potentially, or you get those extra 2 points. In thriving communities. So essentially, IDA put together, cities can apply to be a thriving community. And what that entails is your community is doing what it takes to try and get developers there. And then by getting this designation, we are giving you points to drive the developers to you. So it means you have city incentives in place, you have an updated housing study, you know the land availability, and you have the zoning in place that it needs, the infrastructure's there. You've put all these things together. There are a few thriving communities in the state now. I think we're up to 14. Those projects in workforce get an additional 5 points. Here's the communities. Council Bluffs, Des Moines not included for workforce. Fort Dodge, Mason City, Newton, Waterloo. Those are our new ones this year. Last year they got extensions were Charles City, Creston, Knoxville, Manning, Muscatine, Stanton, and West Des Moines. One did not get an extension, that was Jefferson, because they got a low-income housing tax credit project that built 50 units, and they also got a workforce housing tax credit project. Well, they've received 3 in the last few years. So the intent behind this is, okay, you get the thriving designation, and when you're successful, we take it away and we move it on to the next, because now you have your comparables here, you got the ball rolling, we can move on to the next. This is just kind of a snapshot. Did you have a question? Oh, sorry. This is just a really brief snapshot of the developer market review that we have. We don't weight your housing studies. And what I mean by that is if we were to print out all 350 pages of your housing study and weigh it, it doesn't mean you get more points, right? It's intentionality behind it. If it is one sheet like this and you get to the point and you give us the data we need, thank you. Because I didn't have to read 350 pages trying to figure out what your true market need is. This is just kind of a little snippet of the budget section in Iowa grants. The key thing to remember is just know that your sources have to equal your uses, right? So you can see this project was going to use potentially home loan funds, FHLB, Affordable Housing Program, private lender, local match, private lender, again, developer. There's multiple different options in there, but at the end of the day, this number down here needs to equal your construction costs. Your construction costs come into play right here. And again, you're going to see things in here that I said don't go to your cost cap, but we still need to know those. We need that data. So there's required attachments to this. So you got to have your city resolution of support for the project. Again, get them to throw their financial contribution in there with it as well. That way you only have to have one document. Photos of the project. This is kind of silly. But if it's a greenfield site, people are, why would we send you pictures? Show us the neighborhood, right? Where are you building this? Is it truly in the back 40? Or are we in a, just outside of an established neighborhood that is proximity to A, B, C, D, F, G? Are there established tree canopies? Things like that. If you're doing rehab, show us the level of dilapidation. Because some people might say, yeah, this is uninhabitable. And you go in and it possibly just needs a coat of paint. But if it needs all new mechanicals, it needs water, it needs all these things, then yes, you can make a case for dilapidation. Map of the proposed project location. Documentation of site control. Honestly, if the LLC listed on the assessor's webpage is who's applying, just show us this snapshot of the assessor's webpage. Okay, you don't have to upload your warranty deed or anything like that. Upload your market study or your housing assessment or your market review, and then a screenshot of the FEMA map. And on the application, there is a link to the FEMA map so you can know if you're in the floodplain or not. And this is just kind of an example. So you can see they were getting a little bit close, but this one here is just outside of it. So before you hit submit, make sure everything's complete before you hit submit, because the moment you do, it's done, right? And please do not wait until the last week and then start asking questions, because you might be able to get a hold of me or you might not be able to get a hold of me, because I'm on the phone with somebody that waited until the last week to ask questions, right? Review these, get on our website, research this, make sure it's a potential fit for you. Best way is, like I said, email nix.sorensen@ieda.com. I do have business cards here for anybody that wants them. And as always, expect it to be highly competitive. This last round, there was $64 million in total ask, and I had $35 million to be able to award. That's pretty darn good odds, 50-50 really, because there were 124 applications and we awarded 62. So the odds are pretty good, relatively speaking. So I didn't get this updated. This should say applications will be due mid-June of 2025 and announced mid-August. So a few success stories. This is an example of an upper story. This is the Tipton Theater. The first floor was a Iowa Economic Development Authority Catalyst grant. We received $100,000 to help the theater. This was a vacant building. And then 2 upper story units, they got $52,060 total award in workforce on that project. Multifamily, sorry, we're getting over in Hawkeye land, but this is an example. Coralville, the Lundell, this is 80 units. They got $1 million award. This is Glidden, Iowa, up in Carroll County. This is just a duplex, and they received, they did 2 duplexes, but I think it's $88,537 award. So we'll do great big projects, we'll do small. I think the key one thing to remember for the small communities is half of that $35,000 has to go into one of those small communities. I can only allocate $17,500 to small communities, and then I can start on large. And this is a mixed use example in Marion, Iowa. So there's commercial first floor and residential up above, 74 units. They got $1 million award. And you might say, well, how do we keep track of expenses on this? Square footages will work. We understand that, yes, your water sewer does have to flow through that first floor. So work with your CPA on that. This is an adaptive reuse. This is in Sioux City, Bluebird Flats, 78 units, 1 million. This was also a state historic tax credit project. So if you're looking to do a project like this, that's adaptive reuse, you should look into state historic. It's a painstaking process, but you stand to get 25 and 20% in additional tax credits. So you've got your award. What's it look like? Well, you get an award letter. We send out announcements. The governor does their press release. I send out the contract via Adobe Sign for signatures. Everything's electronic anymore. It also provides documentation of when that email is received, when the contract is viewed. There can be some awardee training after award on now you have your award, what you do, and then you have to review and sign the contract in 60 days of receiving that notification. There's also annual compliance reporting after you get the award, meaning every year you have to let us know where you're at in your project, because you have to start, if you get these projects that were just awarded, they have to start construction substantially by June 30th of next year. And what's the reason behind that? Because if your project is not going to go forward, we will reclaim those tax credits and award them in the next year. If you break ground and I don't take it, and then we get in the next year and you still don't move forward and you turn your contract back, those tax credits are 2 years old and they're gone. They're in the ether and we can't recapture that. And I want to be able to show legislature that we are utilizing every single tax credit we possibly can so that this program doesn't get smaller, it gets larger. Project is to be completed within 3 years of the award date. Now, in code, I can give 2 one-year contract extensions. They are and they aren't hard to get, right? Do your best to get done in that 3 years. At closeout, we ask for a schedule of expenses. That schedule of expenses breaks it down just like your budget was in the application. We ask for a release of confidential state tax information because we're not going to issue tax credits to anybody that's in trouble with Iowa Department of Revenue, to anybody that's in trouble with IRS. Your articles of incorporation, if that's your business setup. Certificate of existence, same thing. Certification statement, that just states I've completed the project as I stated in my application. Certificate of occupancy. Not all communities are created the same. Some people just give me a letter saying, yep, it's done. State of Iowa wants to know they are built to a certain code. I don't know if anybody remembers the Davenport property collapse, right? We need to know things are being built safely so that these residents have a safe place to live, because the way I view it, I'm here for the residents. I want to help the developers, yes, but I'm here to protect those residents in there. CPA examination is required. So that CPA examination, and that's why it's important to know that up front, because as you're spending money, they're going to want to tell you how you document these expenses so at the end of the project it's not painful for them. And then we ask for 6 more photos at project close. A normal certificate of occupancy is going to have the city or company name, the owner, parcel number, address, zoning, owner, all these things. Does it have to have all that? No. But I use this to know how many units you built, and if you don't have it on there, it's going to delay your closeout process. I also need to know what building code it was constructed to. So if it doesn't state it on the certificate of occupancy, a supporting letter from the building official or whomever did the inspection will be required. As with everything, there are fees. There's an origination fee up front of $500, and then there's a compliance fee that's 0.5% of your total award amount at project close. Everything's through iowagrants.gov. If you have a current iowagrants.gov account, there was a maintenance reset back in 2020, so if you haven't touched it recently, you should take a look at it. Other than that, an investor project. So this is for those of you that are like, what in the heck am I going to do with a tax credit? I've got this $250,000 tax credit, but I only pay in $5,000 a year in income tax. What do I do? Well, there's a couple of different scenarios. There's the cash up front. So you work with an investor that you sign an assignment of these tax credits to. And they give you cash up front for it. It can be anywhere from 85 cents, 95 cents, 75 cents on the dollar, right? So if you have $1 million award and they're giving you 85 cents on the dollar, you get $850,000 cash up front to cash flow your project. But at the end of the project, the investor gets the full $1 million tax credit. And then they get to use that as tax relief. Essentially, they don't have to pay in as much on their taxes. Or they do that at close. Once you're done with the project, they give you $850,000 for that $1 million tax credit. Other than that, open it to questions. Right now, this program's been in 65 counties. It should be in all 99, realistically. We want you all to apply. We want to see housing in Story and Hamilton and the surrounding counties. We want it all the way across Iowa. So any questions, reach out to me, but any questions? You apply, right. You hit submit in June. So you better be breaking ground with foundations in the ground before June 30th of the next year. So if you're still in that subdivision process, you should probably wait because you have a lot of infrastructure that you're going to be installing before you're going to be able to break ground on those homes.
Developer probably starting to trying to decide like developer builder. The developer's already putting out the
Right. Do they have they have the financing for the breaking of the ground? Do they have it for the units themselves? I see the scenario you're saying. They're the landowner, but builders would come in to develop that ground, is kind of what you're getting at. The target would be the builder in that instance.
apply. Let's say I wanted to buy platted subdivision.
Mhm.
I could apply
Mhm.
in a subdivision.
Yes,
This program will
100%.
do not have. Like I wanted to say that.
Yeah.
This is an
No.
owner's group. It isn't a
Yeah.
developer's group.
And I use developer and builder kind of almost simultaneously on some of these projects because if you're the owner of the ground, at that point you're the developer. Yeah, you're the builder, but you own the ground.
City support. Is there a limit?
Right. So we can't award everything in one community. I'll just put it to you this way. There were 14 from Cedar Rapids, and of those 14, 11 fell into the scoring. We cap it internally, and that it's internal because it can change, right? Because we all have bosses. But it's 2.5 million or 4 awards, whichever comes first.
Or as this as our city. One project that we
Right.
And that's gonna carry
It's a good question, and no, you can put in as many apps as you want. Just be careful who you support. Is kind of what I'm getting at.
like in life that you really
Yes,
the one that you're gonna do.
yes, Litex completely different ballgame.
Mentioning partners with the city, so do they, units need to be in city limits, or can they be rural?
They have to be in the city limits. In a rural community, if it's one of the large communities, then it's 4.
They don't have to be like a joint spot here and there.
Yes. In fact, we like that because that infrastructure. So anything out in the right of way is not included. Yep. Yes. Absolutely. Right. No, not right now. And the reason I say not right now is because we've caught wind that some are turning into Airbnbs. We've caught wind that some are being sold as luxury apartments. This isn't a luxury program, right? This program is for those employees that you are trying to find housing for so they don't have to drive 30 minutes away. It's for workforce. Well, one thing that we put up right now, I can only allocate 35 million a year, and I can only issue 35 million a year. So if you think about that, if you're not hitting 35 million a year in issuance, you're compounding backlog, right? And that eventually will catch up. So I'd like to see that, but done away with. I'm not anticipating any changes, but the scoring matrix on this is not set by legislature. This is set by IEDA, so that's come up with by staff based off of priorities that we've established and Director Durham. This last round, she said, I want points for single family and owner occupied, and we need to get some upper story units. So you saw we had more points designated to those. And we still did multifamily. You know, it's that priority could change as we start getting the numbers that we need in different areas. Yes, until you potentially hit that community cap or developer cap.
Battling back and forth.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, what was really interesting, so that thriving designation, I wanted to put that out there, and I'm not saying any community here applies for that, but that's 5 points. 5 points doesn't sound like a lot, but if you take away those 5 points, most of the projects would have scored that got awarded were from 40 to 32 and a half. So 5 points skews this, right? So being owner occupied 2 points and being single family, that changes your point values. So it really is kind of, but you got 16 points there for community impact, just impact, local impact. Those I call the fluffy points, right? Because that's where you get to give us a narrative on why it's important and in the impact, and it gets to be fun. A lot of these other things are just black and white. We are a state agency, and therefore we cannot steer you in any direction. But what I will tell you is you talk to your bank. Talk to your banks. They know who to get in touch with.
The ones you showed, that's just like public knowledge, right? The ones you showed, Glidden,
Oh, the thriving communities. Yeah, that's posted.
Can you talk about those three?
As far
Ones
as
that were up there. I'm familiar with the Board of Maine,
well, I mean,
how that project kind of went.
okay. It's Broad Main,
Yeah, they had two of them scheduled.
well and not well. Yeah, yeah. I think it's occupied.
Yeah, that
Mhm. I mean, so 230 open prod. This is in a year's time. This is the first they've let me out of the office. So I mean, I want to come and see these projects, dude. And do not, if you get an award, you send an invite because if Debbie can, Director Durham can make it, she'll make it, right? Um, the reason I kind of just singled these out is because they're just completely different ends of the spectrum. This one was owned by the city, this Tipton one, and they got it in the hands of a private developer who finished it out. Yes.
I'm thinking more so for smaller builder.
Mm-hmm.
Question: what are they going to have to provide?
The CPA examination.
Can you
CPA.
talk more about that?
Yeah, so certified public accountant, right? You will work with them to provide your invoices and your proof of payment. And you should make sure on your invoices that you have a project name or address at least, because then they can link that. And what they'll do is, I wish they would look at all, but they don't look at all. They're going to test a portion of what you support or provide to them and say, yep, this check lines up with this check lines up with this. They all have the right address, everything's lining up. Yes, the construction materials is going to be this. And they're going to certify to your expenses to provide that report to me, because then I'm not going through all your checks and all your invoices. And then if you're ever audited by Iowa Department of Revenue or IRS, there is a report there to stand by, right?
Is that a boilerplate report? I'm not familiar. Is that just something that it's common in that?
So what they'll do typically is I have a schedule of expenses that's a part of the closeout process that they'll download and provide to the CPA, and it looks just like the budget, the sources and use fund in the application. And they provide that to the CPA, and it's important to get that CPA on board at the start, because to try and walk these things back after things have occurred is difficult. And yes, it's just an Excel format that says acquisition cost, building cost, construction materials.
So I'm handing one off to Brian that I worked with. This particular individual, I don't know if you have advice very directly is secure one.
Normally, their tax attorney, whoever they file their taxes with.
Okay.
And if they can't do it, they'll get them in touch with somebody.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Like on that Board in Maine, so it makes sense to me now. Our company did that building, part insulated it. They wanted the material and labor cost broke out.
Mm-hmm.
Went to a different deal.
Yep.
Didn't make no sense on the front end.
Right.
The guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's where they took that money.
And that's why they want that sales tax. Yep.
We're not real good about breaking out material.
Well, no, you're probably doing a cost cert, right?
It's like,
A pay app here and a pay app here. Yep.
We are up against time. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I just want to put a plug in for the Alliance that we can help you if you are looking to do a project like this. We can help you do that. It's no cost to you. That is what we do as economic developers. We are familiar with this program. Last year we had 11 applications come through our office. So if you're doing a project in Boone County, Story County, or Hamilton County, and you would like assistance with going through this program, we're here to help you with that. Let's say thank you to Nick for joining us today.
Thanks.
Appreciate you coming and offering details and answering
Yeah.
questions. Any questions on this? Nick or myself can help answer that. Nick's got cards. I also have cards. Upcoming events, we've got October 30th, a membership meeting in the evening with Jamie Pollard at Sweet Caroline's. Lunch and Learn on social media and marketing on November 22nd. And December 10th is the Christmas party hosted by Plum Supply. Thank you again for coming. And we'll post the video and hopefully your slides, if you can provide those, to our website so you can have those. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.